So today we are reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 12, Creation of the Kumaras and Others, and text 29 on the board. Yes. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Tam Hadame Kritamatim Vilokya Pitaram Sutaha Marichi Mukyamunayo Vishramba Prachabodhayan Tamadame Kritamatim Vilokya Pitaram Sutaha Marichi Mukyamunayo Vishramba Prachabodhayan Tamadame Kritamona Batim Vilokya Pitaram Sutaha Marichi Mukyamunayo Vishramba Prachabodhayan Tamadame Kritamatim Vilokya Pitaram Sutaha Marichi Mukyamunayo Vishramba Prachabodhayam Tamadama Kritamatim Vilokya Pitaram Sutaha Marichi Mukyamunayo Vishramba Prachabodhayam. Anybody else like to chant? Tamadame Kritamatim Vilokya Pitaram Sutaha Marichi Mukyamunayo Vishramba Prachabodhayam. Word for word. Tam unto him Adame in the matter of immorality. Caritamrita, the mind being so given. Vilokya, seeing thus. Pitaram, unto the Father. Sutaha, sons. Marichi Mukaya, headed by Marichi. Munaya, sages. Vishramba, with due respect. Prachabodhayam, submitted as follows. Translation per Bhagavatam Grisesi Bhaktivedanta Swami Shlubhada. Translation, thus finding their father so deluded in an act of immorality, the sages headed by Marichi, all sons of Brahma, spoke as follows with great respect. Translation, please repeat. Thus finding their father so deluded in an act of immorality, the sages headed by Marichi, all sons of Brahma, spoke as follows with great respect. Purport. The sages like Marichi were not in the wrong in submitting their protests against the acts of the great father. They knew very well that even though their father committed a mistake, there must have been some great purpose behind the show. Otherwise, such a great personality could not have committed such a mistake. It might be that Brahma wanted to warn his subordinates about human frailties in their dealings with women. This is always very dangerous for persons who are on the path of self-realization. Therefore, great personalities like Brahma, even when in the wrong, should not be neglected, nor could the great sages headed by Marici show any disrespect because of his extraordinary behaviour. I'm going to So it's a very interesting pastime. Of course, this is Vidura inquiring from Maitreya, and previously we heard about the creation of the universe, and we're now hearing about how Lord Brahma is involved in this creation, all the different aspects of the universal creation. So here we find that, like in the previous verse that we heard on Friday. So I'll just get the page. That Lord Brahma somehow or other, he created a daughter of the name Vark, and somehow or other he become sexually attracted to her, which is not the normal action for civilized human beings. In the last verse, O Vidura, we have heard that Brahma had a daughter named Vark, who was born from his body and who attracted his mind towards sex, although she was not sexually inclined towards him. So for Lord Brahma being the firstborn personality, born directly from Lord Vishnu himself, and was meant to be the most powerful, most wise, how could such a mentality come over him? So this is the story here, and all these sons, headed by Marici, they are inquiring from their father. Of course, they have great respect for their father, and particularly in the Vedic culture. The father's word is like God, basically. There's no question of disregarding the father's word or disrespecting him in any way. But they see his father is being sexually attracted to his own daughter. So how is this going on? So Prabhupada, he hints here that perhaps is it just a particular pastime to teach us that this sort of thing can happen to anybody, and that one must be very careful with the opposite gender in their dealings, particularly those who are interested in their spiritual development. So one interesting thing is that is not mentioned in this verse, but later on 3:31-36, that mentioned, at the sight of his own daughter, Brahma was bewildered by her charms and shamelessly ran up to her in the form of a stag when she took the form of a hind. So in other words, they weren't actually in human form, they were in, that the daughter had taken the form of a female deer, and he, attracted to that, took the form of a male deer. So there are some commentaries given that the normal human behaviour may not apply if they have taken a non-human form, like in this case, the form of a deer. So they're not really under the same guidelines or expectations of those in the human form. But still, even if we took that argument, even in the deer species, generally the father doesn't become sexually attracted to the daughter. I mean, we see that in pigs, for instance, the pig species. There's no guidelines, I mean, the father and daughter, the mother and the son, there can be breeding regardless. But we don't generally see that in most species, and definitely in in the human form of life. So, but there are other examples also of great souls who are similarly overcome by this lust. We know the story of Mohini Morty, when this is Lord Vishnu appeared in the female form, and she, or he in the form of a woman, Mohini Morty, took the nectar that was produced by the churning of the milk ocean and took it from the demons and gave it to the demigods. So Lord Shiva, hearing about this, after some time, he just being attracted, he wanted to see that form of Vishnu in the female form. And so upon his request, Vishnu again manifested that Mohini Morty form. And Lord Shiva, by that influence of Vishnu, becomes so overly attracted to her out of lust, and was running after her, and even through the hermitages of the sages and all the sages, their meditation, all of a sudden this beautiful woman being chased by Lord Shiva runs through their hermitage, and how is this happening? And also Lord Indra, who we know the Lord of the gods, at one time also overcome with lust, seduced Gautama Muni's wife Ahela, and but because he committed this sin, Ahela's husband Gautama cursed the sage in different ways, and so even these personalities, these demigods, are meant to be the most wise and the most powerful and setting the example for others. Sometimes even them are caught, come under the sway of, their senses, the material energy, particularly in the form of lust. Because we know that this origin of lust is basically when the jiva is in their original constitutional position in the spiritual world. They are in that pure state, experiencing prema, pure love of Krishna. But due to misuse of independence, if they happen to fall down into this material world, that pure love in contact with the mode of passion is transformed into lust. It can be concluded sometimes that this lust, this sex desire, is the result of the body. And Krishna does say in the Bhagavad Gita that this lust is situated in the mind, in the heart, and in the senses. So you'd think that if you can purify the body or give up the body, you're free of this lust. But in the first verse of Srimad Bhagavatam 1.1.1 in the purport, we do hear that this pure sex desire is there within the jiva, within the living entity, and it manifests under the influence of Adiras. So Adiras, also known as Haladini Shakti, personified by Srimati Radharani. This is the same energy that Krishna himself enjoys through. So this, and it's also, the dealings with Krishna and the gopis, it's on that level of, there's no material lust involved in their activities. It's on that platform of Adiras or Haladini Shakti. So that pure sex desire is within the jiva, but as we said, when we come in contact with the material energy, particularly the mode of passion, it's transformed into lust. And in Bhagavad Gita 3.37, Krishna says, Kama Esha Krodha Esha Rajaguna Samodbhavaha, that the Supreme Personality of Godhead said, because Arjuna, he's inquiring that how is it that sometimes we perform inauspicious activities as if by force. So Krishna replies that it is lust only, Arjuna, which is born of contact with the material mode of passion and later transformed into wrath, and which is the all-devouring sinful enemy of this world. So in the purport, Prabhupada comments that when the living entity comes in contact with the material creation, his eternal love for Krishna is transformed into lust and association, the bed of passion. In other words, the sense of love of God becomes transformed into lust, as milk in contact with sour tamarind is transformed into yogurt. And as a result, of course, you have the two brothers. The one brother is lust, and his other brother is anger or wrath. So you always find the two brothers together. When there's lust, there's always going to be anger, because that lust can never be satisfied. So Prabhupada continues, by misuse of their independence, when the service attitude is transformed into the propensity for sense enjoyment, they become under the sway of lust. This material creation is created by the Lord to give facility to the conditioned souls to fulfill these lustful propensities, and when completely baffled by prolonged lustful activities, the living entities begin to inquire about their real position. So that's the whole point, that, okay, this is what you want to do. You're going to suffer, but nevertheless, this is your desire. So Krishna makes that arrangement. You can try to enjoy in so many different ways in this material world, but at some point, hopefully, the jiva, the soul, begins to think that, actually, is this what my life is about? Simply hankering, lamenting, and trying to, fulfill these lusted desires, and being completely baffled and frustrated time and again. So that inquiry that Prabhupada's talking about, atato brahma jigasha, this is the first aphorism of the Vedanta Sutra, that now I have this human form of life, what is my duty? So that's the inquiry that hopefully the jiva will come to after being completely frustrated and disappointed birth after birth in this material world, that I have this human form of life, what is my higher duty or responsibility? So next couple of verses in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, thus the wise living entity's pure consciousness becomes covered by his eternal enemy in the form of lust, which is never satisfied and which burns like fire. And who can deny that? We all have that experience, not necessarily sex desire, but just wanting something, that new car or a new dress or a new computer, and you're just meditating on it, and that desire is just burning in the heart. Dusparena palena cha, never satisfied, burns like fire. And even if we get what we're after, for a little while we're satisfied, and then another desire pops up. So Prabhupada comments that it is said in the Manu Samhita that lust cannot be satisfied by any amount of sense enjoyment, just as fire is never extinguished by a constant supply of fuel. In the material world, the centre of all activities is sex desire, and thus this material world is called Maitunya Agara, or the shackles of sex life. So if one's desire is to get out of this material world, to escape this samsara, repeated cycle of birth and death, one has to break down all those shackles, all those desires that are keeping us in this material world. And the strongest of those shackles is that sex desire, because that's considered the highest pleasure in this material world. Therefore, it becomes the strongest shackle. So therefore, rather than trying to fulfill these different desires through practice and detachment, slowly one can be purified. The heart can be purified. But if remember back in the 1980s, early 1980s, there was a singer called Sting. This was a number one song. I forget what it might have been, called Cat's Eyes or something, but part of the lyrics was, I've been putting out the fire with gasoline. I don't know if anybody's old enough to remember that song, but putting out the fire of gasoline. So that's the thing. that trying to fulfill these material desires is like putting more fuel on the fire. Temporarily, the fire subdued, but then it comes back even stronger. So that's in our conditioned life, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to put out the fire with gasoline, but ultimately frustrated time and again. So, as I said earlier, the first verse, Srimad Bhagavatam, the purport, Prabhupada quotes from Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur in his commentary that Vishwanath Chakravarti specifically deals with that original and pure sex psychology, or adiras, which is completely devoid of any mundane inebriety. And so the whole creation is moving under this principle of sex desire. And in this modern civilization particularly, that's like the focal point. Everything revolves around that. And we see that it's not necessarily modern, like Hiranyakasipu. Hiranyakasipu, of course, means one who was very attracted to soft beds and gold. So in other words, wealth and sex desire. That was his goal. If he satisfies these two things, then he thought he was successful. So in the same way, in conditioned human life, we're thinking if we have a very beautiful, willing partner and lots of money, our life is successful. That's in a conditioned materialistic society. That's like the guideline. If we have those two things, then we've actually achieved success. So it's not that that sex desire is unreal. It's definitely there, but in its original reality is its experience in the spiritual world through Haladini, or the influence of Srimati Radharani, her Shakti, Haladini Shakti. So in our conditioned state, our heart is covered with so many different material desires and propensities, but through what can basically be an unknowingly performing pious activity, agata sakriti, that somehow or other, slowly, our heart becomes purified life after life. And so that pious activity, that's slowly purifying those desires, and slowly that Haladini Shakti, that Adira, slowly infiltrates into the heart. And if we continue in that way, eventually we come to the point that when we come across bona fide spiritual life, spiritual knowledge, then we're in a ripe state to grasp that. Anybody who's been selling Srila Prabhupada books, they know that so many people there's just no attraction there whatsoever. And even if they read something, there's just no concept or attraction or understanding, whereas another person, it's like they're hungry for that knowledge, and immediately they grasp it and they think, yes, this is what I've been looking for. So, everybody's on a different platform according to their past pious activities. So Lord Caitanya mentions in Caitanya Charitamrita, or he's quoted in Caitanya Charitamrita, that just trying to remember the verse, Brahmate. It's just lost me. But basically the translation is that the conditioned soul is travelling throughout the different Brahmanandas. Brahmananda, Brahmate, Kona, Bhagavan, Jeev, Guru, Krishna, Pasade, Paya, Bhakti, Lati, Bij. That throughout the different Brahmanandas, the different universes. But if one is very fortunate, they come in contact with a bona fide spiritual master or transcendental knowledge, and that Bhakti Lati Bij. That Bhakti Lati Bij is like the seed of transcendental faith within the heart. It's there within everybody, but it's lying there in a dormant state. Like if you go to a garden shop, hardware store, and you get a packet of seeds. So those seeds are in a latent state. But if they're put in a fertile position with sunlight and water and soil, then that seed starts to fructify. So in the same way that if the soul is in a ripened state, we can say, due to previous pious activity, that seed of faith becomes fructified by the association of devotees, by hearing transcendental knowledge, etc., and that seed begins to fructify. Creeper of devotion. So, of course, one thing is that we hear in this verse that the word adame in the matter of immorality. So we can consider what does this mean in this context. So no, dharma is used in different ways. Sometimes it refers to that eternal constitutional quality that something has or a person has, like water. The dharma of water is liquidity. Sometimes it might be in steam or it might be frozen, but the normal condition of water is liquidity. So that's the dharma of water. The dharma of dogs is to bark. That's what they do. And we have Sanatan Dharma, that the constitutional position of the living entity is eternal servant of Krishna. So that's considered the Sanatana, the eternal Dharma, something that doesn't change. So, but it's also, Dharma can be used that what is the proper behaviour of a person. And so the word Adharma, meaning that Lord Brahma, even though he's in a very responsible position and everybody is following his example, but he's acting in a very adharmic or very irreligious way or manner. So this particular pastime where he's approaching his daughter due to uncontrolled sex desire, that is not the normal activity in this human form of life. But in the following verses, it is mentioned that Prabhupada does comment that it does happen in human society. So it's not that it's never happened before, but sometimes it does happen, and therefore we have the example of Brahma that we learn from. This is not the way, the normal way that in the human form of life. So, when we're considering why is it adharma, why is it irreligious? So, generally, if there's progeny, like a child born of that union, like through incestuous union, generally the it can be understood as like a very sinful birth or low caste birth, that quite often the child, resulting child is, there's some sort of mental or physical defects. What's that called, that condition? There's, I'm just trying to think. When a child is born out of incest, quite often they're, that's there, but there's a word for it. I can't think of it, but anyway, it's and sometimes you hear about communities or families in the backwoods, like in the US. You hear in the mountains of West Virginia, there's like inbred families sort of thing. You ever saw, I think, come out in the 70s, a film called Deliverance. I don't know if you ever saw that, but anyway, it was trekkers. They got sort of caught up in this incestuous family, and it's very low class sort of situation. But even if it's not incestual sort of connection, but even when there's not a broad enough sort of genetic pool, like sometimes we hear, like in the Hindu tradition, it's generally said that the boy and girl they're considering marriage, they're not meant to be in the same gotra. That's to, broaden the genetic pool, so these sort of birth defects or issues don't happen. And it does hear, you do hear from time to time that brother and sister who were born but separated very young, and they never saw each other, and later, decades later, somehow or other, they meet each other, not knowing that they're brother and sister, and there's an instant attraction there. So this sort of thing, these guidelines are there to stop this sort of thing happening. And like amongst the Amish community in the US. So originally from Europe, when they came to America and settled there, there was about, I think, 800, 700, 800 altogether. So all the different Amish communities, everybody who was born in that community more or less descends from the original 800 or so. So it's not a very large gene pool. And but they say that when they're matching a boy and girl together, they don't check their DNA. They just say whatever happens is God will. And it is understood there is a very high rate of birth defects as a result of that. Sort of their blood connection is too close. Also, amongst the Muslim tradition, it's very common that they'll marry their first cousin. There's different cultural reasons for that, but again, there is a very high rate of birth defects as a result. So these guidelines that are put there as not just, there's a scientific reason behind it as much as anything, that when, boy and girl are getting married, or when there's any sort of sexual union, it shouldn't be just random. There should be some sort of guidelines behind that. And that guideline means civilized human life. So therefore, the different instructions given to us in the Vedas, there is, even if we're not understanding what the actual reason is, there are a lot of sort of, very scientific and very sound guidelines why we should follow these different instructions that are given us. Anyway, in conclusion, we can sort of understand that, and Prabhupada hints at this, that Lord Brahma, he was acting in a very inauspicious way, but as Prabhupada says, it might be that Brahma wanted to warn his subordinates about the human frailties of dealing with the opposite gender, and it is very dangerous to be whimsically or, to dealing in this way if one is desiring path on the self-realization. As we hear the next few verses, after some time, Lord Brahma, hearing the entreaties from his sons that this is improper behaviour, he comes to his senses and he casts off the body. The acharyas mention it as like the mentality or the consciousness. He casts that off and re-establishes himself in his proper situation. So this is the thing that we can learn, that even if these great souls may act in improper ways, there may be a thing that they're under the influence of the material energy, but also we can learn from that example. The example is sometimes given that like when the spiritual master instructing the disciple, if they're not a very advanced disciple or the relationship is quite new, the spiritual master understands that he can't heavily chastise or give a task to that disciple that is beyond their capacity. And example is sometimes given when, particularly in India, in Hindu tradition, the boy and girl get married, and the girl goes to live with her husband in the family of the mother-in-law. So the mother-in-law obviously wants to train up the daughter nicely so she can, be a first-class wife for her son. But she knows it's a very new relationship. She can't chastise, or she shouldn't be chastising or being heavy to her new daughter-in-law. So what she does, she trains her up in the company of her own daughter. And so if the daughter-in-law makes a mistake, she chastises her own daughter. But because there's a familiar relationship, her own daughter, she doesn't take it very seriously. Oh, that's just mum, she's just on my case again. But the daughter-in-law, she's hearing that actually it was my mistake, and she learns from that. So through that sort of, diplomatic arrangement, the mother-in-law is teaching the daughter-in-law, how to be a first-class wife and partner for her son. So in the same way, sometimes these great souls, they act in a particular way, and they don't ultimately become, completely fall down or overcome by that. But we can see from their mistake, from their example of what not to do as a result. If the same thing happened to us, it may destroy our spiritual life. But we see from the example of others who can overcome it. And we can learn from that. So these are different things we can hear. This lesson we can learn from this pastime of Lord Brahma. So we'll end there. Thank you very much. If there's any questions or comments at all. Yes. Well, we understand it by the example of the gopis. By their example, that's how we understand that anything they did was not for their own pleasure, only for Krishna. That's the example. But we can't artificially come to that platform. All we can do is see that and pray that one day we can follow in their footsteps. It's recommended that the devotee follow in the footsteps of the residents of Braj, and by following their example, slowly we can, pursue that particular goal. Of course, we can remember that Prabhupada is also a resident of Vrindavan, so we can follow his footsteps also. But what he's presenting is the, and what you're alluding to is the example of the gopis, is the topmost selfless love for Krishna. But as I said, you can't artificially come to that point. All you can do is practice our daily sadhana with the goal to slowly achieve that. So it's Christian sexuality like, I think further on, that the sons of Brahma, they don't know what to do, so they think all they can do is pray to Krishna, please rectify this situation. And Prabhupada comments that to overcome these pushings in the material world, it can only be achieved by the grace of Krishna. So whatever issues we have, we pray to Krishna that by your grace, please allow us to overcome these anarthas, these unwanted things. So in the end, that's all we can do, because, you know, we can't think that we're so powerful that we can overcome the pushings of the material energy. But that material energy is one of Krishna's energies. So if we get his grace, then very easily we can cross over that ocean of, you know, material propensity.
Would you recommend that people see that subtraction as distraction? I mean, if it's seen as a distraction, yet, you know, families have to go on, all these things have to go on.
So Krishna's in the centre, that's all. Everything will go on, but unless Krishna's in the centre, it's simply going to be birth up, you know, repeated birth and death.
So that involves, I think as Krishna says, that within those religious principles, he is that sex life.
That's right. Yeah. If you properly perform sex life according to religious principles, he is non-different from that act. He says that himself. So it basically comes down to knowledge. The more knowledgeable we are, the more we can, you know, go through this material world with minimum harm to ourselves or others. Yeah, Krishna. Anything else? Any other questions, comments? Yes, Ru.
Just the point that Prabhupada mentions in the previous purport verse that this extraordinary immorality on the part of Brahma was heard to have occurred in some particular kalpa. It could not have happened in the kalpa in which Brahma heard directly from the Lord the four essential verses of Srimad Bhagavatam. Because the Lord blessed Brahma after giving him lessons on the Bhagavatam, that he would never be bewildered in any kalpa whatsoever. This indicates that before the hearing of Srimad Bhagavatam, he might have fallen a victim to such sensuality. But after hearing Srimad Bhagavatam directly from the Lord, there was no possibility of such failures.
Yeah, so we're hearing Bhagavatam, which is non-different from Krishna, and then we're in a secure position. I guess that's the conclusion of that. Yeah. All right, thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai, Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai. Merry Christmas.